Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start the MELT webinar for 2019-2020. Before we start, just to let you know that we are recording the webinar and it will be made available to you on the data server. The webinar today, I'll do the hosting. My name is Mike Grocott. I'm the project champion for MELT, and joining me is Dr. Andrew McDonald from Stirling High School. He's going to go through some activities with the Earth observation browser. Now, in case you haven't used the webinar tool before, just to point out that if you tap on the screen, so if you were to tap on or click on the using webinar screen, that will go full screen, and then to return back to this mosaic, you click there and that will go back. I would suggest that probably now using for this presentation you're fine with this, but when we do, Andrew does his work, which will be sharing his screen with you, it is worth then maximising your screen, and then you'll be able to see it in a little bit more detail, because at the moment this is quite, it'll be shared down in this box, and as you can see it's quite small. So I'm going to go through it now. With the webinars, not only will you get the video, but you also have this PowerPoint. And so I'm going to go through some stuff so you can actually use this maybe as an introduction to your students, contextualize the work. So you'll be able to take out some of the slides and use them to support you launching the project. I'm also going to go through quite quickly and get onto the actual training part, for which Andrew's going to lead, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about it really is just allow you to recognize so you can go and look and find the resources yourself. Now, if you are wanting to understand, why run the IRIS project, or if you want to try and bring maybe SLT or other teachers on board, what I've got here, as you can see, is a bit of a survey. We've just done some conferences, and as it says, we actually asked students, why would they do an IRIS project? And this one was, did you enjoy the experience? And yes, is the key phrase comes back. And then, as you can see, we've got all these different interesting, having fun in science, understanding more about science, working as a team, meeting scientists. So you can see these key skills that we're actually helping to develop in the students. In terms of teachers, what did you get out of it? Well, this one I think is the key one. As we all know, it's a question of if we can get our students engaged with their learning, they're going to enjoy the learning, they're going to enjoy the learning, they're going to be take more time with it and probably spend that little bit more effort in understanding it. You'll see all our scores are relatively high, and yes, this is one of the lower ones at 75% is deeper understanding curriculum content. That's, although we 75%, that's still a very high number. So again, these slides are there for you to share with other staff and other colleagues. So to go on to the actual presentation now, this is a quick summary of what we're going to go through. Quite a lot, as I said, but hopefully by the end of it, you'll feel more confident and comfortable with delivering this project. The chat box down at the side, please just add in questions as they come up. Now, what doesn't happen is it doesn't scroll away, so we'll keep an eye on that. But if we don't catch your question, please do then just type it in again later on. And I have put a couple of slides in there for questions and answers if we want to just deal with issues as we go through. So why MELT? Well, as you can see from these two images, it is an incredibly relevant topic at this moment in time. Not only with David Attenborough's new TV program, and of course the first one was on Antarctica, but also in terms of young people taking action, making a stand, wanting to show a different generation that they are concerned about it. And Greta Thunberg is someone who is bringing things to the fore of people's attention. And that in itself is a discussion about how and why we protest. But what I like to say to students is, yes, it's great positive action, and the idea of going on strike once a month on a Friday is it's great for showing that you care. However, to make an impact, what we really want you to do is start doing some science, start coming up with solutions, start educating the people around you with actual scientific facts, and then being proactive. If you're being proactive, sharing that information, then you could probably have a bigger impact than just having a day off school. But as again, that's in that case, in my personal opinion. We've got constantly in the news, we've got these ideas of different things. So we've seen the effects of climate change. And Robert Swan is someone who started off the project with us. He's the first person to walk unaided both North and South Poles. And this I find a very, very powerful quote. Certainly when I'm talking to Key Stage 3 or Year 7s, to say that, you know, when I was their age, that was the idea of someone else will look after it. Now it is really their generation that does need to address this situation. And I think it's quite a powerful quote to show students. Now with IRIS and our projects, as you saw, we do surveys. And what we want to do is we want to be able to support you, but also we are a charity and we want to track to see what we're doing is actually worthwhile. So what we have is we have these simple survey monkeys, and again, you'll be able to have this link from the presentation, or just scan the QR codes. And we've got a different one for England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland because of different curricula. Some of the questions are curriculum based in terms of understanding. The idea is if you can get your students to do it straight away as a baseline, ideally before they actually start the project, but I know some of you have already started, it's still fine. It just gives us a line in the sand, and then we'll do another survey at the end. You turn around and say, right, we've run the project now, Mike, you know, where's the end survey? What we can also do, because I'm conscious for some of your performance management, you might be taking on an extracurricular role, or you're developing a science research club. We can look at the data and give you a report that can actually support your professional development. So it's not just for us, but it's also for yourselves that you can use this data. So please, you know, the SurveyMonkeys, they are quick and easy, it's digital, and so it should be pretty straightforward for the students to use. And of course, being SurveyMonkey, they can do it on their phones or personal devices. With the MELT project, what we would like is avatars, for you to issue avatars to your students. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. One of the reasons is because in terms of GDPR and identifying students through safeguarding, etc., what we need is this anonymization. However, if the students do come up with an idea, or they are interacting with the university and someone turns around or someone scientist says, this is interesting, who did this? What we can then do is track back to the school and to the students and then put them in contact by yourselves. So the avatars, the explanation is very simple. They all have 8 characters. We start off with an M for MELT. First 3 letters of the school, so it'll be ASK for Askers, because I know Askers are with us, underscore, and then the first initial, second initial, so Mike Rocott, MG, and for me, it'd be MG1. If there's a Mark Gooding in my school, it'll be MG2. The idea is you make a list of these avatars, and then you just send them to me. So a little Excel spreadsheet, so I can log that and say, right, Sterling, these are the 5 students, the 4 students, the 10 students that are involved with the MELT project. The other side of the coin is not only for the anonymization, it allows us to see how many students are engaged in the project across the country. Because one of the things we want to do is make the projects we run relevant and engaging. And we like to report back to our trustees and to other organisations when we're seeking funding to say, we've got this project, these are the number of students that are engaging with it, this is the outcomes. So in a way, you're helping us. And otherwise, what we have found in the past is people are working on the projects, doing some fantastic work, but we have no idea and we don't know that they're doing it. And so therefore we're missing an opportunity to show impact and show engagement of young people. Certainly when we're talking at a political level, but with government and agencies, then we can turn around and say, well, in your area, we have these 60 students who are working on this project. Were you aware of this? And it just helps us open doors for funding and gives young people more access. So please do look at the advertising. It's very simple. It is really very simple. And there's lots of instructions how to do it and put them together. For those who aren't aware, I think most of you are in schools anyway, our website is where you access all our resources. So homepage, at the top there, it says data server. When you click onto that, you'll be taken to a bit of software you can download for free if you wish, but then you can go onto the data sets, and that's where you get your username and password that you were issued with. If anyone has forgotten the username or password, please just email me and I can reissue that to you. Once you're actually in the actual data server, you just need to scroll through to where it says Melt Portal, and you will see so go through, so you click there, username and password, that'll take you into a list of all our projects, and you will see if you've not been in there for a while, we've refreshed it and we've basically tidied it up because some of our projects we're retiring, still there, but we're not fully supporting them, and others, we've got some new projects on board. So from there, go to the Melt Portal, click on Enter, and you will see the different resources. And I'm going to quickly go through what is there for you. One of the first things I implore you to do is if you go to the, and I'm just going to go back, if you click on the General folder there, you'll find in there a PDF saying Getting Started 2019-20. This PDF contains all the basically frequently asked questions, all the little things that hopefully will make it a lot easier for you to get this project starting, because what we want you to do is we want you to facilitate the project, we want you to start the project, but we want the students to basically run the project. It is meant to be student-led research. And I'm conscious, I've taught for 20 plus years, and I'm conscious that you have lots of things on your timetables, your lot of workloads. So we want you to really to be the body in the room to actually support the students rather than actually having to drive it yourself. So do have a look at that, and please do read it. It's full of interesting information to help you how to set up your avatars, different hyperlinks, and some of the resources that I'm going to mention. There are also within the General some training films. They are screen captures of going through some of the more complicated aspects of one or two of the projects. First one, which is straightforward, the CPON website, how to create a map in QGIS, and the Melt portal, so basically how to access what I've just shown you, and the download of QGIS. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the first project, Melt contains really 4 main aspects. And so under one of those is the carbon footprint. And as it says, ideally suited for Key Stage 3 and 4. All we've had is 6s and 7s doing it as a joint engagement project between primary and secondary. However, we don't really support primary schools that much. We are secondary focused. So it's, this is why if you want to run it with a local primary, that's fine. It's not a problem at all. It's accessible. But really, we're looking at Key Stage 3 for this one. Carbon footprint, there's some resources there. What the students are doing is they're doing a survey. Go onto the calculator, sign in, create an email. Now, how you do it is up to you. I would suggest that one person has access to the account, one student, and the other students bring the information to them, and then they upload it. And I'll explain a bit more later why, but if you have one person, then it's going to give you one line on the spreadsheet. I'll show you the spreadsheet in a second. And the things they're looking at then are gathering this information. It's a lot of information that schools the students need to get together. It does involve them talking to the bursar, site staff, catering staff, and so again, advocate on their behalf, but get them to organise themselves so only one person or a small team are going to the bursar or going to the site staff. This is what the students are about. Gathering data can be quite an involved process, and it can be time consuming. I had a student ask me, requested, and they can email me questions, but they must always come via yourself or a member of staff. But the question was, well, shall we do a paper survey? And when I pointed out that 1,200 students, 1,200 bits of paper is a lot of effort. Maybe they could look something a bit smarter. They looked at Google Sheets, they looked at Excel, they looked at SurveyMonkey. So it's something that actually was doing the work for them. So they pull together all that information and upload it. What we also want them to do when we talk about carbon footprint is not just look at the classic, we're just going to get this baseline. We want them to actually start researching ways of doing carbon capture. And here in the news we've got bacteria, we've got microbial reactors. This one, ExxonMobil site, carbon capture systems. The idea of through the refining process, they're actually pumping the carbon dioxide back into the actual bedrock of the sea. But we want them to look beyond those generic terms. Once they've done their survey, that's when they can start thinking, well, how can we make an impact in the school? How can we put back on certain things? Some schools, they had 1 day a week. They had students, all the tutor groups would take all the recycling, all the paper and card down to the bins, and there'd be a group of students there making sure it went into the right areas. Just the classic ones, lots of schools are still using polystyrene, plastic, food containers. So they were looking at ways that they could actually educate, and they were doing assemblies to educate people. Again, it's something that has been around a long time. But now what we've got is we've got the situation where students can actually turn around and say, these are the figures for our school. Let's make a difference. Let's see if we can make a change to that. This is a Canadian company, Direct Capture from the Air. So they can look at that company and look at the science behind that. So again, we're looking more at the science behind some of these things. Southampton University, they research, are also looking at pumping the carbon dioxide into the seabed, and there's some postgraduates and graduates working the videoing the bubbles coming up from the bedrock to see how much is actually escaping back into the sea. So there's no point pumping it all into under the seabed if it's just going to come back up through. And that's an active research project at the moment at Southampton University. The outcomes, as you can see here, are we like students to create posters, and a little bit more about posters later, but basically an artifact, a way of communicating what they've learned. All our posters, we want academic posters. And templates on our data server for each of the projects and ideas on how to again come back to that later. What you won't see is sugar paper and Pritt stick. The idea is students are looking at referencing the work, looking at what they've got, how do we communicate that. And you'll also see here a spreadsheet. Now this spreadsheet has names on. If you look into the folder on the carbon calculator, carbon footprint data, click on that, you'll find that these spreadsheets are there, but they're anonymized. So you won't have the identifier, you'll know because it's got your unique identifier code there, and then you'll actually see the results. Which is why if everyone's going on logging, you end up with lots of different lines. It's not a problem, but just be aware of that. Make sure you know they can identify who it is, because we're all putting in the same identifier code, then who's putting the data in my computer. So that's the outcome from carbon footprint. One of the other things, this is with the Open University and the Forestry Commission. They would also like to basically serialise every tree in the country. So they just want to serialise. Now I know we've got Askers from Norway with us. this might work in your area. If you're not interested to see if you can try it out. Basically, this is also an app, so I'm showing the website here, but it is an app available in both Play and Apple stores. So it works as a beta version on the phone, and students literally go out, find a tree, so maybe in the school grounds, find the tree. They have to identify the type of tree. And once they identify the type of tree and register the tree, what they end up with is the tree becomes serialized. Now, they could just leave it at that, put a picture of the tree, and it's geolocated. But if they actually now, large scale, you can see now they actually put the height, the diameter and the height of the tree, and then they get all this additional information. So the amount of carbon dioxide stored, the energy conserved. So as you can imagine, that's quite powerful. It's also a really nice example of trigonometry in context. So how do they measure the height of the tree? Also, they require to use of keys to identify trees. But now they can start looking at, well, if we've got these type of trees, this is how much carbon is being stored, and they can start looking at what the base level is for the carbon within their school. Now, what they can also then do is apply for some free trees and go through this process. We had one school, they've got 30 cherry trees, and they've planted one as their school stem tree. But what they're doing is they're going to wait before they plant the others until they've got a better planting plan. So these are students who are now devising a planting plan for the 30 trees with the support of the school and the local authority to help develop a better carbon footprint. And they're year 10 students. They started in year 9, they're now year 10 students. So again, very proactive and a very positive process. Now, the EO browser, this is, each year I've tried to evolve the Melt project. And this year, what we want to do is use the Earth observation browser. And Andrew's going to take you through some aspects of this, and it's really his enthusiasm for it that's made me realise it's a really powerful, really engaging tool for students. So if some of you have used QGIS before, you've probably worked out it's a bit clunky, and we'll talk more about that later. But EO Browser is excellent, and it's free, and it's also very powerful. So if you go onto the EO Browser site, this is what it looks like. And very quickly as an overview, you can see here, this is where the satellites that you can select. If I go on there, so basically type in your location, it will go to your area. Then you can select your satellites. Default is Sentinel-2. I've selected all the Landsats. They are archived ones as well, so the data set is actually very large. Once you've done that, you'll be given a range of options of satellites for the calendar dates that you've chosen. So I'll go back. It's difficult to see, but you've got calendar dates there. Click search. You come up with a range of satellite images that you can use. You won't see the satellite images, you just see dates with some information, cloud cover, etc. Choose the right one that you want, and as you can see, this is than I am at the moment, sat there doing this webinar. And you can see here we've got a series of preset combinations from the satellites of the different wavelengths and bandwidths that we're using, and we'll talk more about that. Some preset ones I've actually now seen the visual. So, no further ado, I'm now going to hand you over to Dr. Andrew McDonald, who will now go through an introduction to using the EO browser.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. As Mike has said, my name's Andrew McDonald. I'm a physics teacher at Stirling High School up in Scotland. But before becoming a teacher, I spent a number of years with the British Geological Survey as a remote sensing geophysicist. So this is really going back into my early days as a research scientist. What I'm going to do today is to give you a little bit of physics, the background, if you like, about Earth observation, and then get on to using the Earth observation browser, which is far more interesting than bits of the physics. I have to remember to use the green pointer rather than the mouse pointer, but we'll see how, yeah, there we go. Okay, it's really important to understand that the images that come from satellites are more than just pretty pictures. They're scientific data for every pixel that is shown in the image. And the information that they're giving is reflectance. How much energy is being reflected from the ground surface up to the satellite at different wavelengths. Now, it happens that different materials interact differently with the electromagnetic radiation, essentially the light that's coming from the sun. In this slide, we've got three different surface materials. We've got green vegetation shown by the green line and the green shading. We've got dry bare soil shown by the brown line and the sort of orangey brown shading. And then we've got a small example of water. So basically, what happens is that if we think about the vegetation spectrum, what we're looking at is how much energy is being reflected from the ground surface up to the satellite for these different wavelengths. And the wavelength increases from left to right. So up until about 0.7 of a micrometer, we're in the visible part of the spectrum. So that's blue, green, red. And then from there, we're into the near infrared, and then following on into the middle infrared, sometimes also called the short wavelength infrared. What you can see is a series of features, and these are telling us something about the characteristics of the surface material itself. So for example, if we look in the visible part of the vegetation spectrum, we'll see that there is a peak in the green. And that's good because that means that what we have is a lot of green light being reflected from the vegetation up to the satellite. The two absorption features, the two dips, if you like, on either side of the green, so that's in the blue and the shortest wavelengths, and then the red, that's to do with the pigments, typically chlorophyll, and they are absorbing the energy from the sunlight to convert it into the plant's food, the sugar, and then onto the starch. So that's all to do with pigments and things like that. Then there is this massive increase in the amount of energy that's reflected from the vegetation as we go into the near infrared. And this is often called the infrared plateau. And that means that if we could see in the infrared, plants would look incredibly bright. But of course we can't. We can't see that. That's all invisible to us, but the satellite has sensors that picks up that energy. As we go further out into the shortwave infrared, we get a dip here and a dip here, and that's related to water within the vegetation itself. If we contrast that with the soil, we can see quite a different style of spectrum. It's gently increasing as we go from the visible into the infrared. And we've got a couple of little features here and here, which are to do with the minerals contained within the soil or indeed the rock. And then looking down at our water body, we get a bit of reflection in the visible, but when we're out into the infrared, nothing at all. So in the infrared, water looks black. All of the energy is being absorbed. Now, for a variety of reasons, satellites can only record information in certain wave bands. There's just not enough time to do it right the way across the spectrum. So, for example, the Sentinel-2 instrument, and I do apologise for the light going off, I should have mentioned that. It's to do with energy saving in my school, but I hope you can still see everything. The satellite itself has a number of different wave bands, So we've got bands 2, 3 and 4 in the visible, blue, green and red respectively. We've then got a close set of bands in the very near infrared, then bands 8, 9, in 10 in the near longer wavelengths of the infrared, and then we're out to band 11 and band 12 out in the shortwave infrared. And if we can understand the differences between what we would expect to get in those wave bands from the different surface materials, then we can actually discriminate, tell different types of materials apart, and also identify what they might be. So for example, soil in band 11 would appear to be brighter than vegetation in band 11, and the same is true for band 12. So if we use those bands in any processing that we're doing, then we've got the chance of actually identifying different kinds of materials and surfaces. So what I'm going to do now is to show you the spectral reflectances in a bit more detail. Here's our standard grass, looking very much like the previous diagram, our little green peak there and our chlorophyll absorption in the red there. Hang on, wrong, there we go. That's our soil reflectance as before, but now have a look at the spectral reflectance of snow. Quite different. We have a lot of energy in the visible and just into the near infrared. Almost all wavelengths are being reflected at the same level. And that seems reasonable because snow is white, therefore we're picking up loads and loads of energy that is actually being reflected right the way back up to the satellite. And so we end up with white snow. But as we go to longer wavelengths, again we get a dramatic drop off until we get out to the shortwave infrared out in this part of the spectrum. Now that is different from the vegetation spectrum, and so we could easily identify, discriminate between snow and vegetation. It's also different from the water spectrum, and therefore we could distinguish between snow and water and so on. Okay, at this time what I want to do is to go onto the EO browser itself. So I'm going to try and share the screen, and I hope that you are now seeing the EO browser actively on your screens, so that I can actually take you through how to use the EO browser to produce some images. So you'll see it's fairly straightforward. It's a web browser application, and you'll see a number of items which are slightly grayed out down at the side here. These become active depending on what's happening, but for purposes of today, I'm actually going to log in so that all of them become active. You can sign up for free. It is free. It is available to you. All we have to do is to log on. So bear with me as I type. And once I've signed up, then these features become available to me. So the first thing to do is to say, where do I want to look at in the world? And for whatever reason, I'm going to pick on a place called Cape Crozier. If it is in the Gazetteer, it will pop up as a pull-down list, and this is the one that I'm looking at or looking for. Click on that, and it will then zoom and move itself to that particular part of the world. And you can use the plus and minus keys to zoom in and out, and to the click and drag to move yourself around. So the next thing we have to do is to tell it what satellite to actually use. So I'm going to use the Sentinel-2 satellite. So that's ticked. and I'm going to use a level of processing of level 1. I hardly ever use level 2, so just stick with that. We can choose how much cloud we're likely to accept, but obviously we want a nice clear day. So if we're interested in different dates, we can click on the usual calendar, and I'm just going to look at September this year. No, I think I'm going to use October, to be quite honest, I've decided, because September's a bit dark, and I'm going to go from the 15th, and then I'm going to go to October the 31st. So I've now set my range. I'm looking for any imagery of that area within that date range, and then you hit the search bar. And you can see that there are a number of thumbnails on the screen, and then the footprint, the actual area covered by each of the images, is shown in the blue on the main map display, and by hovering over them you can actually click on them and it will pull up the relevant images for that particular area. Now, there's a particular image that I know about, which was on the 21st of October. So I'm scrolling down through the dates, and you can see I haven't got to the 21st of October. It says load more. If you click on that, it will load the other data in the data set. And then you click on visualize, and that will actually load the data into the display screen. And by default, it will do what we call a true color. So this is how we would see the imagery with our own eyes. If we were in an aeroplane looking down, this is how we would see the Antarctic area, Ross Island, and the area around it. Because what we've done is we've put the red information on the red gun of the display, the green on the green, and the blue on the blue. Now, I'm particularly interested in
the actual screen on the bottom left-hand side. That should enlarge it anyway. But Andrew, do you want to enlarge your screens by clicking on the screen maximize, just in case other people haven't got that function? So the full screens button, third one. There you go. Right, is that better for everyone? I've just noticed some of the questions came up. Catherine, it could be that it's just taking time to refresh from you. You should be able to click on the icon, as I said, on the left hand side, and that'll make your screen full screen. The colourful map is what we're looking at the moment. Alright. So yeah, I'm using an iPad as well, Catherine, and I just tapped on it and it maximised that screen. Alright, here we go. And that's the benefits of having young people in the room. Right, Andrew, I'll hand it back over to you now.
Okay, that's fine. There is an issue with iPads. If you're using Safari, for example, it really does need to be the most recent version of iOS to run it properly. The company that run the EO browser aren't really supporting iPads, sadly. Chromebooks are fantastic, but iPads a little bit less good if you've got an old one running an older operating system. Okay, if I may continue, if that's okay, then all I'm doing is I'm zooming into a particular portion of that image, and it looks very, very bright. I know that this area here is a little bit of snow, rock and ice, and then we've got sea ice over here. Because the satellite is basically picking up so much energy, I'm going to do a little bit of processing to make it not as bright. So here we go. I've taken the gain down by going to these slider bar icon up here and then changing the gain and bringing it down, and that shows you the difference between, this is Ross Island, and then we've got the sea ice over here. I'm particularly interested in this area here. So I'm going to zoom into it. This is taking the satellite data probably to its extremes in terms of how it looks. If I take it any further, it will pixelate. Now, we've got the snow and ice over here, but we've got this sooty, dark, brownish area here. This is the Cape Crozier emperor penguin colony, and that's just taken a few days ago. And historically, that's quite an important penguin colony. But what we're looking at is not so much the individual penguins, but what they've left behind. Yes, this is penguin poo from space. So we could go around and we could map it and we could look at it, but we need to do something else to make it more visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the visualization, and instead of looking in true color, I'm going to choose my wave bands. So if you click on the customize part, you get the 12 bands of Sentinel-2. Band 1 and Band 8A are sort of more technical ones, so we really only work with Band 2 to Band 12. And I'm going to pick up and drag Band 12 onto the red gun, Band 11 onto the green, and Band 2 onto the blue. And you'll see that the image changes. And that, what we're looking at, is information that our own eyes cannot see. We have made the invisible visible to us just by using the monitor. Again, now we can see that our penguin poo is now showing up quite brightly. And I can do a bit more than that, in that I can do some processing. Going back to the custom visualization screen, on the right hand side there is a hand, and then there are the two left and right arrows. If you click on that, it pulls up a dialog box, and so if you have any young people who are particularly keen on coding these days, they can actually get into code and change what's going on. So I'm going to change the look of my particular image. I'm typing in different coefficients, and I'm just going to tone down the Band 2, which is the blue gun. So I've increased Band 11, I've decreased Band 12 slightly, and I've decreased Band 2 quite a lot. That's the blue information. If I then refresh the screen, and this is working in real time, folks, we get now a really interesting image of the penguin colony and how active it is at the moment. So I can now do some interesting things. For example, I can take some measurements, or at least I should be able to take some measurements. Why? Okay. It's always the case. It worked in rehearsal, because I was doing that this morning. I'm just going to go back to that. This is the first time that has not worked for me. Okay, we'll see what happens later on. Anyway, using the ruler, it is possible to actually delineate the size of that particular colony, measure its length, its width, its area, and then you can compare that with other dates and things of that nature. It really annoys me that it didn't work. As I say, I was using it only this morning just to check. You can download the image. Once you're happy with what you've got, you can download an image. You can add annotations, a little description, show the captions if there are any, and things like that. When you press the download button, it will save it as a JPEG image to your chosen folder, your download folder, and then you can use that in other areas such as putting it into your poster or a presentation and so on and so forth. Right, I'm going to then try and do a time lapse, and I hope this will work. So when you click on the sort of video film kind of icon, you go into a time lapse dialog. I'm going to put the cloudiness up to 100%, and then I'm going to go back to the 1st of September and then go forwards to today's date, which is the 6th of November, press the search, and what will happen is a series of thumbnails of all the images of that area are pulled up. So it's looking back at the data set. You will notice that some of them look very yellow, and that's because they're basically covered in cloud. So we don't want that, so we'll click it off, we'll click that one off, click that one off, and just scrolling down. That one's got a bit of haze over it, but we'll leave it in for the moment. As you can see, that one's very much hazier, so we'll take that one out. And then we've got a few more coming in. Then we've got more cloud, take those out. And now we've got 6 frames going from essentially the 1st of September through to today, indicating what's happening with our penguin colony. 25th of September, we have very little penguin poo noticeable. And then we can run it as a GIF. And you can see that things are changing within the colony over that short period of time. Again, once you stop the active frames going through, you can then download it as a GIF for further use. Right, now, another thing that we can do is to use what is known as pins. And you will see there is a pin marker on here. If you click on that, it will then say, okay, you're interested in that image, we're going to compare it with some other images, and I'm going to move this one up to the top. And you can then compare images either as changing how opaque one image is over the top of the other, or you can play around with the split screen and things of that nature. I'll come back to the pins in a bit more detail in a moment. I'm just going to try and see whether the distance thing is, no, it's not working. Not quite sure why that is. Okay, so that's looking for penguin poo from space. Let's go to somewhere more understandable. And so I'm coming back to the UK, and I'm particularly going to a place called Tewkesbury. Some of you may know that. It's in the west part of England. We've got I've lost track which one it is. It's not the M4. Heading down south from Tewkesbury, we've got the River Severn and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my date range again. I'm still going to go with the Sentinel-2. I'm going back to 1st of September through to the 31st of October, and I'm going to search for some imagery. And again, we've got the images coming through. We can see that some are cloudy, some are not. And I'm going to go for one in September on the 19th of September. So I'm picking this one, very little cloud, which is great. and I'm going to visualize it and then just collapse this down. And so what we're looking at now is a natural colour composite of Tewkesbury. We've got the motorway coming down here, and we can see a whole set of different field patterns. We've got urban areas, we've got some built up sort of industrial estates over here, we've got a river running through there, and we've got some fields which are appearing brown, and we've got some fields which are green. So we've got a change and a difference of surface materials. Now, I can play around again with things, and again I'm going back to the custom area, and this time I'm going to put band 6 onto the red, band 11 onto the green, and band 12 onto the blue, and that will give us a completely different look to the image. This is now a real false colour image, and it takes a little bit of getting used to in terms of what do the colours actually mean. But basically, this kind of russety colour here that I'm highlighting is forestry. The steely grey kind of colour is built up areas. Healthy green vegetation are in these orange tones, and the bare fields are all in these browny or slightly bluey grey areas. So depending on what we want to actually do, that will then allow us to detect different things in different colours more easily. So I'm going to go and pin that image, and then I'm going back to my search results, and I'm going to pull up this image from the 27th of October and go back to my custom bands 6, 11 and 12, and I'm going to pin that as well just for the sake of it. And you'll see immediately there is quite a difference between the two dates. What we are looking at now is after a flooding event. So this area through the centre, going diagonally through the centre, is where the rivers have actually broken their banks and they've flooded onto the floodplains that are there and have been there for some time. Notice, however, that water is different in colour to the actual sort of reservoir stroke gravel pit type areas where the water looks black. And that's to do with the fact that in the gravel pit areas the water is deeper, it's absorbing all of the infrared, whereas in the flooded areas we have shallower water and we have vegetation below it. So we've got a fair bit of reflection going on. Also, these areas are muddy. So we've got a lot of reflection coming back. So even though it is water, which should ordinarily be black, it is coming out as a slightly reddy colour. Okay. So I'm going back now to my pins. I'm going to compare my two data sets. We've got the flooded one against the unflooded one using a split screen kind of mode, and you can see this is our flooding here in October, this is our nice unflooded area in September, and if we just change the split you can get an idea of the change that's going on. So that's another thing that you can do to compare images. Now, one last thing on this particular part of the demonstration is to use a different sensor entirely. So I'm going to click off the Sentinel-2, but I'm going to click on Sentinel-1. Now, Sentinel-1 is a different satellite completely. It uses radar rather than optical visual imagery. And radar imagery can be a little bit tricky to actually get your head round, but because it looks so differently. However, it is very, very useful in that it doesn't require the sun to be out, so you can take images at night time, and also it can penetrate through cloud and all of those kinds of things. So again, a quick search, and I'm going to pick out an image around the time of the flooding, so 29th of October. I'm going to visualize it, and I'm going to go to a particular combination. Now, radar imagery normally comes in black and white, and it looks very, very grainy, but what it's doing is it's basically telling you about how rough the surface is, and also whether there are sharp angles and things. So where you have the built-up areas in Tewkesbury and near the motorway, there are a lot of angular buildings, and that creates a lot of radar reflections back up to the satellite. Whereas in the flooded parts near the river, we get very little energy reflected back to the satellite, because it is actually reflected away from the satellite, so no energy gets back up to the satellite. It is quite a tricky type of image to get your head around, but you can see quite elegantly the extent of that particular flood area, and measuring is definitely not going to work for me this afternoon, but again, you could get pupils to actually measure out the area of flooding, all of those kinds of things from that particular kind of imagery. Okay, so MELT started off by looking at glacial retreat, and I'm going to look now at the Petermann Glacier in Greenland. I'm going to zoom out so that we can at least see the map. And again, I'm going to go and search for some radar data of that particular feature. As you can see, there's quite a lot of data, and I'm just going to pick one from the end of October to see what we can actually see. So this is the Petermann Glacier coming out here. We've got rock and ice of the Greenland itself going into sea ice and so on and so forth. So I'm going to zoom in a bit. And have a look at the glacier in a bit more detail. So we can see that there is what we call the calving front of the glacier. This is where the icebergs are actually dropping off and going off into the sea ice and things like that. We can see a few flow lines in the glacier itself, and we can see the sort of sea ice up here. And the idea behind MELT was to be able to take some measurements of where this calving front actually is, and if we go back in time, we can see how that has changed. Unfortunately, because the measuring device isn't working today, I can't really demonstrate that to you, but it's quite easy to mark a point of interest, say maybe this feature here on the glacier itself, and then we could go back to our search, change our timeline, let's go back 2 years, see if we've got any imagery and now you can see that there has been some kind of a difference, a change in where that calving front actually is, and if the ruler had been working, you'd be able to measure that, and you've got some idea then of a distance. You know the time interval between the two images, you can actually work out what the retreat rate was for that particular glacier. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to stop sharing the EO browser. I hope that's given you a flavour of some of the things that you can do. It is a fantastic little device. You can do so much with it, but one or two more slides back on the main screen. So I hope you're now seeing the Tewkesbury images again. I'll just whiz through those because we've done those live. But what I wanted to talk about was how we translate the spectral information that we might record on the ground or in the lab with actual satellite spectra. So on this image, which is part of Scotland, you can see that it's a natural coloured composite. It looks as if you were flying over the area. We have one of our local reservoirs, Loch Venacha up here. We've got the Lake of Menteith down here. We've got some nice green fields. We've got some forestry. We've got some upland vegetation, and we've got some bare fields. Now, using a different system, I can pick up individual pixels for the lake, upland vegetation, forestry. I need to move my green pointer. The lake, upland vegetation, forestry, cultivated land, and the bare field, and actually drill through the data set to have a look at what the spectra look like as if they are coming from the satellite. Here's my false colour image of the same thing, and we can see the bluey-grey bare fields. We can see our forestry in the russety tones, the water as black. And I still didn't move my mouse properly. So using the other system, we're now looking at the different spectra of the pixels, but that's a bit confusing having them over the top of each other. So here's the spectrum for water. Again, we've got wavelength down on short wavelength at the left-hand side, long wavelength at the right-hand side. The crosses represent the actual bands from Sentinel-2. So this is band 2, 3, 4, and so on. And you can see how the energy dives off into the infrared. We then go to the forest bands, and we can see that there's quite a difference. There's the step up in the infrared that we would expect from vegetation. We've now got upland vegetation looking similar, but there is quite a difference in the long wavelength infrared part of the spectrum. So that would be useful to use to help us tell forestry and upland vegetation apart. Similar view for the bare field, but there is a change in the brightness in the visible part of the spectrum, and also what happens right out here in the shortwave infrared band 12. And then we've got our nice green healthy vegetation with our massive increase in the near infrared, and then the drop down in the shortwave infrared further on. And just to compare those two, you can see the differences between them in each band, and using that you could then devise your best way of illustrating those differences in your imagery. You could process them or anything of that type. So I think we're now back to Mike. I'm going to switch off my camera. I'm happy to look for images, any questions from you as you go along.
Thank you, Andrew. You're disappearing into the gloom.
But my mic will still be live.
It's great practicing what you preach, but it is getting a bit dark there. Right, thanks, Andrew. Hopefully you've now got a flavour of what's happening. I am going to, this whole video is being recorded, but I am going to clip Andrew's section, and that'll be a standalone training video for you to access. I've also just emailed you all some guidance and this is what you should have received. This is just a couple of screen grabs of that. So I sent that out to all your email addresses. There are other websites that you can use to look at for data sets. So this is a United States a geographical survey, and this is another very nice one. This is some of you might have seen this. It's a beautiful animation. You know, as a starter for a lesson to have that playing on a big screen as people come in. It's very interesting. But please be aware and be conscious of the data sets. You've got to dig a bit deeper because some of this is actually more. It looks great, and you can adjust for speed and show it in different graphical projections. Some of the data, I think, has just been a little bit more colourful, visually. And then the ESA has an app for the iPad, and it's now available on the PC, where you can again access different data sets and mass them onto the Earth. Earth observation, one of the first projects we started with MELT was this idea of monitoring the carving of the glaciers, working with the Centre for Polar Observation and Monitoring at Leeds University. This website is where you can access those images, the Sentinel-1 data, and you can go through that using something called QGIS, a piece of software which is a industry standard, and it's used at many universities. One of the problems with QGIS is it is open source, and so therefore it's going through lots of iterations. Two problems with that. One, the resource that we wrote for it were written for a specific version 2.1, which is what I've got all the links for to download. It is now on something like version 3, so it has a different front end. It's not a problem, it's just although some of the icons are the same, it is a bit complicated. The other problem is because it's open source, IT departments tend to not like it, and they're very nervous of it. So if you do want to load it, let me know. I've got it on a memory stick, so I can WeTransfer it, so you don't actually have to go to a website to download it. You can actually give it to them as a website, but they still are very nervous about it. There is a Mac version available. Again, young people work these things out. We couldn't quite resource and can't keep on updating on resource for every version. QGIS is a lot clunkier than a EO browser, but I've made these 3 training videos and they will explain everything to you. Dr. Anna Hogg, who runs the CPOM Centre, is a world leader in this field, and she's also one of the advisors for Frozen Planet 2 at the moment, and a lot of her work is published and used by scientists to help explain what's happening with the glaciers. What she has produced for us, for those who aren't geographers, is a series of images which have identified features, and the students can actually just download an image and just annotate it accordingly. That's the problem with Sentinel-1. Before we used to get maybe an image every 4 or 5 months of the poles. Now we get one about every 16 days. So there's a lot more images, and of course there isn't the manpower for them to go in and annotate every image. So what they can do is actually go in and annotate these images on behalf of the scientists, so be part of the work, which is why we want them to always reference the work in terms of their avatar, so that they can come back and discuss it. And so there's some key areas: Pine Island, Peterman, Thwaites, and Jacobson Glacier are the ones that we're interested in. Again, in the Earth observation folder, you'll see there's an activity called MELT 101, and there's a PDF in there, there's a PowerPoint, and there's some worked examples for students to work their way through. Here's an example of some student work. What they've done is they've annotated where the carbon front is here and where the crack is, and then you can work out the rate at which this is moving. Again, for some of the work, you're either going to have a map, as I've just shown you with the annotated of glacial features, or they might actually produce a CSV file which shows the geographical points, which then can be put into another bit of software by the university to actually map the movement. Here we've got an example of CSV output, and here we've got an example of using QGIS to actually map the carbon. So that's where it was originally, and that's a later image, and it's actually now broken off. Again, another huge image. We talked earlier about posters. On the library, you'll see there's templates. The templates are actually written in PowerPoint, and they print up to A1, A0 size. So the idea is there's a template there. Students can just put their images, guidance about what they should be put in there. Again, some information about what should be included on an academic poster. But these are just templates and guidance. They can produce their own. Here we've got some examples. This one here, this was year 10. These two are year 10 students. This is this one I think is a year 12 student. So basically, yeah, we've got landscape or portrait. We want them to work towards an artifact at the end. So, any questions? I'm conscious of the time. I've been watching the chat box. My questions have come through. So what I'll do is I'll move on, and then at the end, if there's any further questions, we can ask them there. With your information, what we would like you to do is, because the file sizes, certainly for posting stuff, can be quite large, rather than we transferring stuff around, if we could ask you to upload it. So again, on the data server, certainly the images that you're producing from QGIS, you'll see there's 4 areas there where you can just click on that, select the file and upload it. Or there's a general one, you can just upload any posters, any work that you're doing. What happens is then that goes into our server. I go into our server, I download it, it then gets put into a forward-facing thing so everyone can see it. So it's a way of we actually put it on. It usually takes me about a week because I can download it, but I've got to give it to someone else to upload it. IT manager. Please do upload stuff. And if you want to just tell me, yep, Mike, I've just uploaded, or Shim's just uploaded something, brilliant, and that way I can go straight in. Same as the carbon calculator information, that goes onto our server directly. If I go in once a month, download it and put it onto the front page for you. But if you want it sooner, just email me and let me know. This is just taking you through the different stages of uploading. Crest Awards, accreditation. Crest Awards, some of you might be thinking about it. Please do. Iris projects sit very neatly with the Crest system. Gold and silver are quite standard. Extended projects, some people do EPQs. They can use this as part of an EPQ. Any IB schools out there? Again, core project, bringing in other curriculum areas. And something I've not added on there is actually Duke of Edinburgh. Some students have been using this project for the DOV Gold and Silver, the Community Award, in terms of producing some information and then communicating it with the wider public. And that is the end of the webinar. Has anyone got any questions that they would like to ask us? Just put them in the chat box. Brilliant. Yes. Thanks, Ken. And that's the other thing. Although Melp started off with the idea of looking at glaciers, the reality is what we want is just young people looking at the impact globally. They might want to look at wildfires in parts of the world. They might want to be, it would be quite interesting now to go to look at California. They could track the wildfires in California by looking at deforestation. You could look at the Amazon deforestation. The trick is just find the images and going through. But as Andrew has shown you, different filters and different processes, you can actually pull out a lot more information. The Tewkesbury one of the flooding that's going on at the moment, maybe in your area you've had some flooding, or maybe you want to just compare different areas, different winters over the last 3 years, for snow lines and what have you. all really up to the students. There is no limit to what we want. But what we would ask is what they pull together, they communicate to their peers, they communicate to the families or to the wider audiences. And we will give you that opportunity. The more we know about what you're doing, the more opportunities we can give you, because we know certain things that are happening in certain areas. And so if we know that there's an opportunity to talk at the university in, I don't know, maybe around the London area, if we know there's some students working in Melton in the London area, then we can put that opportunity towards them, as opposed to us thinking, well, there's a school signed up for Melt, but we don't know what they're doing. So, any other questions? Conscious that it is 5 o'clock, just going over 5 o'clock. As I said, I'll record this. We've recorded this. I will process it and clip it and such like, and then there'll be a hyperlink to watch it. So, with that, I've got a few more questions coming in. Hope you found that useful. Again, any questions, just email me, mike.grogot@researchingschools.org. We have other webinars. Next week, we've got our webinar for the Webb Space Telescope project. And then we've got a webinar the following week for genomics. So you will get invitations to those webinars. And we've just had an ionic liquids webinar, for which the link will be up shortly. More than happy for you to share the videos with colleagues and such like. There's nothing that is IP sensitive. And as I said, the more we can share and use, the better. Right, so if people need to go, please do. I'll stay online for a little bit longer to any questions. Oh, the chat as well. We do capture the chat and as a text document, and that is also available if anyone's got. So if there's any questions, or I'll pull out any specific questions. As I said, just sent you a PDF with the Earth observation activities that you might want to give the students to have a look at. It is pretty draft because I've just knocked it up, but any improvements, please just let me know. And don't forget the survey. Really important. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and it's good to see ASCO back on board. If you check, actually, you'll see there's a lot more information that you actually uploaded last time up there now. Right, hi everyone, and please, I'm still here if you want to ask any more questions. Bye, Karen.
very wrong.
I'm just doing the webinar. It's all right, it's just finished.
Andrew, I'm not sure if Paul's actually online or it's just.